Want to say peace and blessings to you, family. Hope all is well. Hope you guys had a great weekend. We're going to go ahead and continue on with our weekend teachings, and we're going to close out the weekend with Revelation chapter 1, part 2. And for those that didn't catch the initial teaching, it's still on the YouTube channel, and I want to encourage everyone subscribe to the channel. And this lesson is titled "In Anything But the Negro: The Martian Christ versus the Negro Messiah." So we're going to get started here in a second. Feel free to share this, invite others in, and we'll get started here in another minute or so. So if you guys can hear me clearly, just type in one, and we'll get started here in a second. And the objective, the goal of this presentation is to show you how to properly explain Revelation chapter 1, give the full description of the Hebrew Israelite Messiah. So, again, we're going to start here in a second. Want to give enough time for others to jump in from the very beginning. So, we're going to deal with tonight anything but the Negroes. That's the topic. This is part 2 of Revelation chapter 1. So, again, anything but the Negro. Martian Christ versus the Negro Messiah. And again, we'll start here in we'll give it another minute at the max. So share the link, share it to your Facebook. But this is a very good lesson that is going to give you some talking points on how to properly explain the scriptures, explain Revelation chapter 1. And again, for those that did not catch the part 1, go to the video section and you'll see it there, Revelation chapter 1, part 1. So just review that, and that ties right into here. So again, the book of Revelation, we can literally just off of chapter 1, I could stay there and teach that for weeks. But we're not going to do that. We're just going to navigate and continue to transition. All right. So, and for Sister Ruhama, yeah, I do have a Cash app. It's dollar sign P matter of fact, what is it? I hardly use it. I believe it's PF Pastor PFR is what it is. And I'll put it inside the uh I'll put it inside the timeline here. Yeah. Actually it's dollar sign Pastor PFR. P is in Peter, F is in Frank, R is in Robert. For for anyone that want to um um be a blessing, that'll be great. But you're not pressed into doing so. But that will be greatly appreciated if you did. But again, past is the dollar sign Pastor PFR. But nevertheless, we're going to go ahead and get started here. Anything but the Negro. Anything but the Negro. The Martian Christ versus the Negro Messiah. The Martian Christ versus the Negro Messiah. And I know that many of you guys are probably trying to figure out, why did I come up with that name? Why did I come up with the title for this particular discussion? And the reason why I came up with this title is because it rings true to day, the time that we live in. And I'm going to explain it. This lesson came about years ago when I was having lunch with a Microsoft guy representative at work. And so we started talking the word. And he asked me what was my thoughts about the Hebrew Israelite movement, and I explained it to him. And so he asked me about what's my thoughts about Christ. Am I saying that Christ is a black man? Christ is a Negro? Christ is dark skinned? And I told him absolutely. And so this is what I'm going to share with you. This is the conversation. This is the discussion here. All right. Bear with me 1 second. All right. Sorry about that, guys. Had to clear up a couple of things here. Um, but nevertheless, we're going to go ahead and get started here again. So, like I was saying, that this lesson is based off of discussion that I had with a Microsoft representative. And the question that I asked him when I told him and I proved to him that Christ, the Hebrew Israelite Messiah, is melanated, right? He did not want to admit that he was a Negro, but he said that he believed that he wasn't white, but he believed that he was olive. And so this is my response to him. And I hope and pray that this helps you guys and that there's a lot of information that is very helpful to you. All right. So again, anything but the Negroes, the Martian Christ versus the Negro Messiah. Let's go ahead and get started here. Question number one. Why are Martians green? And this is all going to tie into where I'm going at with this. Why are Martians green? Why are they called little green men? This is coming from live science, and you know I am a geek, right? And I'm going to use this as an example of why I came up with the topic. All right, so live science. This is what it says. It's not easy being green. In science fiction, use of the phrase "little green men" dates back to the 1940s, with the Encyclopedia of Science tracing the first usage of the story or to the story Maya's Little Green Men. And it comes out of a book or article called Weird Tales 1946 by Harold Lawler. All right. So throughout movie history, aliens have been referred to as little green men. Have you guys noticed that for the most part, every alien that you see, for the most part, especially when you look at the older movies, the aliens are green. So the article goes on to say little green men also appeared on television, with the Great Gazoo character debuting on the cartoons The Flintstones. In 1966, the term surfaced in the scripts of science fiction programs like Star Trek and the 1969 episode Tomorrow is Yesterday. And this is the Great Gazoo. Right? Some of you guys that have watched the Flintstones, this is you remember this image here. That's the Great Gazoo. And notice the color of. Let's deal with. Let me show you a couple of other popular green Martians. You guys notice that that's the android. You guys notice that from Toy Story. But notice the color of them. They are what? Green. So is this why many would rather worship a Martian Christ and not a Negro Messiah? Is this why many would rather worship a Martian Christ and not a Negro Messiah? This is some of the articles that you will see out there describing Christ. All right. This is what they would say. And some of you guys probably heard this say, people say this. Well, Jesus probably had olive skin. All right. And that's what the person from Microsoft defaulted to, stating that Christ, the Hebrew Israelite Messiah, and that's what I'm going to continuously use as a reference because of the narrative that is out there about the Hebrew Israelites. So, I'm going to say Hebrew Israelite Messiah, just so that way everyone is reminded that uh, Christ or Yahweh Shai, Hamashiach, is a Hebrew Israelite. Okay, but nevertheless, you'll hear this. Um, you'll hear others refer to him as saying that, yeah, he has olive skin. That's what you would hear them say. But we're gonna debunk this right here. We are going to completely debunk this. All right. This is coming from CBS News, an article titled "Jesus Probably Had Olive Skin." And it goes on to say Jesus is often depicted with ivory skin, but like most Jewish people of his time, he probably had darker skin, a theologian explained in a column for The Atlantic in 2013. Right? So notice what it says. Jesus probably had olive skin. So what did the Hebrew Israelite Messiah look like? All right, what did he look like? And we're going to answer that question. This is coming from uh, an article from Different Spirit. All right. It says here, what did Jesus look like? What did Jesus look like? People have a funny idea of what Jesus looked like. Jesus of Nazareth was not white skinned. Notice they make it clear now. More and more you're hearing people say he was not white skinned, but then it goes on to say Jesus was not European. Jesus was a Jew. Jesus lived in the land of Israel in the Middle East. The Bible tells us that Jesus walked wherever he went, so we can easily imagine that his olive skin would have been darkened by the sun. Notice what it says here, olive skin. All right, so that's the narrative. All right, here's another article, Jesus, Hebrew and Jewish. All right, this is coming from a website, Christian Crier, okay, a popular website. All right, not sure if they're still popular at the time. I mean, now, but they were very popular years ago. But this is what it says: Jesus, Hebrew, and Jewish. There are also no reliable extra Bible or biblical sources or even secular historical sources that says that Jesus was black. Hebrews likely had olive color skin, not black or white, as some pictures falsely show Christ to be. All right. So you still see what the theme of olive, anything but the Negroes. And this is why I say, and this is what I said to that guy from Microsoft, I said that you will rather worship a Martian Christ versus a Negro Messiah. Right. Anytime someone says that uh, the Hebrew Israelite Messiah, Christ, had olive skin, they are telling you that he's a Martian, right? They try to use that as a term of mixture or whatever, but that's what they're saying. He's he's abnormal. But let's deal with this some more. Let me go a little deeper here. So again, it says Hebrews likely had olive colored skin, not black or white, as some pictures falsely showed Christ to be. Right? So did Christ have olive skin? Did the Hebrew Israelite Messiah have olive skin? What does it mean to have olive skin? What does it mean? Let's go to the Oxford Dictionary definition of olive. Let's see what it says here. All right, this is the entry. It says a small oval fruit with a hard pit and bitter flesh. But here's the kicker. It says, green when unripe and brownish black when ripe. Let me say that part again. Green when unripe and brownish black when ripe. So when I pulled this out and I asked the guy from Microsoft to pull this up in his phone, right? He hesitated reading this because when he says that the Hebrew Israelite Messiah is olive, right? I know he's not defaulting to brownish black when ripe, that he's actually defaulting to what? Green, unripe. So my response to him was, so you believe that uh, the Hebrew Israelite Messiah was undeveloped? That's what you believe? And he began to what? Hesitate. He didn't know how to respond. So when someone says that Christ or the Hebrew Israelite Messiah, his skin texture was olive, right? This is what they're referring to, an unripe olive. Because if they were referring to a ripe olive, you see here, brownish black. That's what it says. It goes on to say, in entry number 3, sub entry number 3, a grayish green color of like that, excuse me, a grayish green color like that of an unripe olive. And we see grayish green like an unripe olive. You see where I'm going at with this, guys? See, a lot of times, many people, or not, you see the herd mentality among people. You see the herd behavior among people, especially uh, among our community. When you see, especially religious communities, I'll just put it that way. I'm not just going to say our community, but religious groups. You'll see the herd mentality among religious groups. When they hear someone use something as a talking point, instead of really doing their individual research, they all begin to what? Echo the same thing. And we'll do a teaching on herd mentality, herd behavior. So again, a grayish green color like that of an unripe olive. And this is a model. I can't remember her name, but this is a model, right, from Africa, right? I believe she was from Cameroon. But look, see, as a people, we can make a number of shades of color, but we cannot make a color of grayish green. We can have black, blue, black, brown, all the shades. We can create these colors from within our community. No other group can do this right here. So this is an example of what? Blue, black, or should I say a ripe olive. This is an example right here. All right. So did the Hebrew Israelite Messiah have green skin? Absolutely not. Did biblical Israelites have green skin? Did they look like Martians? Did they look like aliens? Absolutely not. Let's go to Revelation chapter 6, verse 8. Let's see what it says about the color green. It says this, and I looked and behold a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed him. Oh, excuse me, and hell followed with him, and power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beast of the earth. So let's deal with the Greek definition of green. It says here, greenish, verdant, dun color. All right. So we see this color is associated with what? Death. So when they say that the Hebrew Israelite Messiah had an olive color and they're referring to the greenish unripe olive, they're saying that he looks like he's dead. All right. Walking Dead, right? What color is the Walking Dead? Most of the zombies you see, they have what kind of complexion? Like a greenish color, a greenish gray color. Again, we make all kinds of colors, but this is not the color that we produce. All right. So greenish, verdant, dun color. So let's go to Genesis chapter 1, verse 30. Let's see the color green there. It says this, Genesis chapter 1, verse 30. And to every beast of the earth, and to every fowl of the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat. And it was so. All right, so we see green there. Let's see what it says here. The Hebrew definition of green in this particular text, all right, Yerek is how you pronounce it in the Israeli language, Yarak, in ancient Hebrew. But nevertheless, it says here, the yellowish green of young and sickly vegetation. So if they're saying that uh, the Hebrew Israelite Messiah is an olive color, right? And they're defaulting to the unripe olive. So they're saying that the Hebrew Israelite Messiah looked sick, right? As you see here, the yellowish green of young and sickly vegetation. So did the Hebrew Israelite Messiah have green skin? No. All right. So what is the complexion of the Hebrew Israelite Messiah? What is his skin complexion? Now, unfortunately, whenever we get into this discussion, especially if you come out of the church, right? The response for the most part is going to be Christ died for all. Color doesn't matter. But it always, uh, um, those are the things that's always said to us. But if color did not matter, why have a Caucasian image? Why have why have an image of him that we know is not accurate? Why not have a dark melanated uh, image of him, even though we're not supposed to make any graven images of the Hebrew Israelite Messiah? But why not give the proper and accurate descriptions of who he is? And see, when you understand this, when you change his appearance, you're actually changing scripture. Revelation gave a stern warning about changing the God, changing the scriptures. It tells us if we change anything, if we add or take away from anything inside this book, that the plagues will come upon us. So when you change his skin tone, when you say that his skin complexion doesn't matter, when you say that he was of a lighter shade or Caucasian color, matter of fact, I'm not going to say Caucasian color because when we understand that word Caucasian, you have dark Caucasians that's dark like you and I. The Indians from India, many of them, when they come to this United States, they are what they fall up under the classification of Caucasians. So I'm not going to use that, but whenever we deal with the Hebrew Israelite Messiah, he's always viewed as having no pigmentation of his skin. Let's put it that way. All right. So what is the I ask this again. What is the complexion of the Hebrew Israelite Messiah? All right, let's deal with this. All right. So again, always within our community, we get told that it doesn't matter, right? But we're going to completely knock this stuff down. Again, if you change his skin complexion, what you're doing is you're changing scripture. If you say that he had no pigmentation, then you are changing text. All right. So let's read the scriptures here. Verse 14 and 15. It says this: his head and his hairs were like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were as a flaming fire, and his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burnt in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. Let me read it again. His head and his hairs were like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were as a flame of fire, and his feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in a furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. We are going to break this down. Now, I have to correct some of our brothers and sisters because some of our brothers and sisters who are in the camps, they would say that his eyes were red because he drank a lot of wine. That's absolutely incorrect, and we'll deal with that. All right. When you understand that portion of the text, it's describing the intensity in his eyes of what he see of what had become of his people. All right. So again, let's break this down. We got a lot to cover here. So to understand this text, you would have to understand it through the lens of the Hebrews. I'll say it again. To properly understand this text, you are going to have to understand it through the lens of the Hebrew Israelites. Let's go to the Song of Solomon, chapter 5, verse 10. And we're going to use that to tie in to this scripture here. So it says here, my beloved is white, tazak or sak, right? Tazak, and ruddy, adawam or adawam, right? Excuse me, right? So my beloved is white, tazak, and ruddy, adawam. The chief is among them 10,000. All right, let me read it one more time so y'all grab this again. But my beloved is white, tazak, and some would say sak, all right, and ruddy. Some would say Adam, but we're going to do it from an ancient perspective. Adawam, the chief is among 10,000. All right. So I want you to pay attention to the background here. There's a reason why I have this image here. So you can understand how our skin, how our hand looks like what? The ground. Adam, right? Looks like the what? Adamah, which is on the ground. You can see how that confirms Jeremiah 14, and we'll deal with that another time. All right, to give proper clarity to that chapter. Okay, but nevertheless, my beloved is white and ruddy. The chief is among 10,000. So let's deal with this again. My beloved is white. Tazak or Tazaka, you could say it that way. Tazaka or Tsaka, all right? Or you could just say Tsak or Tazak, all right? So not trying to get all into this syntax or whatever, but we'll deal with that another time. So let's see what the Hebrew definition is for white, all right? And we see it here, all right? So it tells us that this word means bedazzling white. Now, does this mean that uh, this is describing his skin to be a non-melanated, to being having no pigmentation? All right. So is this is this verse describing that? All right. I see a question here. Do you have a KJV with a pronunciation in it, the proper names? Actually, there's none out there. What I do is keywords. I'll put the actual Hebrew word there. And so that's why you see in my presentations, when I'm reading, I'm actually putting the Hebrew word there. Now, there are some Bibles out there that will have, that does have the, at least the Hebrew word or the letters there. So that way you can read it read it from that aspect. But the actual pronunciations, many of them you don't. So, but here I tend to put keywords. I'll put the Hebrew writings there. All right. So, nevertheless, it says here, all right, bedazzling white. All right. Bedazzling white. All right. So let's break this down. Let's go to the Oxford Dictionary definition of white. Tazaka or tsaka, or some will just, cut it off and truncate it, but we're not getting into that. But let's see what it says here. It says, entry number one, of a bright light, blind a person temporarily. But then the sub entry, it says, amaze or overwhelm someone with a particular impressive quality. That's the key right there. The sub entry of entry number one, it says, amaze or overwhelm someone with a particular impressive quality. Now that's starting to give you more of an understanding of when you see white, what it actually means. So in Hebrew, white means amazing. Let me say that again. In Hebrew, white in this text means amazing. So my beloved is white. In other words, amazing and ruddy. All right. We're going to deal with this. Adam or Adam, Adawam. Let's deal with this. The Hebrew definition of ruddy. Let's see what it says. It says rosy. All right. Really doesn't really give us a lot to go off with. Well, we see lentils, and when you deal with the lentils and the color of the lentils, we get an understanding of the color of Esau. But let's deal with this here. Let's go to Webster Unabridged Dictionary, 1913. Let's see what they say about this color or about the word ruddy. This is what it says. It says, and we're gonna focus on entry number 2, of a lively flesh color or the color of the human skin in high health. Let me say that again. Of a lively flesh color or the color of the human skin in high health. Again, when you say ruddy, the color of the human skin in high health. So this is saying healthy skin. All right, let's break it down some more. All right, let's go to Genesis 25:25. Let's give some confirmation here. And the first came out red, right? Adam, we see Adamah Wanai or Adamnai, right? All over like a hairy garment. And they called his name Esau or Ashar. All right. So was Esau, was he white? Was he a white man, as many would say he is? Absolutely not. I'm going to back that up. This is coming from the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, 1915. This is what it says. Ruddy is the form taken by the adjective red when used as a term of praise of human skin. Remember, we just said that, right? And this is its use in the Bible. This is going to knock down a lot of stuff. It says the Hebrew and Greek word are all usual words for red or to be red. It says the dark skinned Hebrew, let me say that again, the dark skinned Hebrew found great beauty in a clear complexion. Let me say it again. The dark skinned Hebrew found great beauty in a clear complexion. It didn't say the olive color. It didn't say the unripe olive. It said the dark skinned Hebrews, plural, found great beauty in a clear complexion. Let me say it one more time so this can, for the people in the back, right? And I'll read it from the beginning. Ruddy is the form taken by the adjective red when used as a term of praise of the human skin. And this is its use in the Bible. So when you see ruddy, this is saying that that person had dark skin and his skin was what? Clear. It was healthy. Okay. So when we dealing with Esau, the reason why they placed a point of emphasis on him having dark skin and that his skin was clear is because he was hairy. They wanted to make sure we understood that there was nothing wrong with his skin complexion. There was nothing wrong with his skin. All right. So we know that Esau was dark skinned, but he had what? A lot of hair on his body. That's all this is saying right here. So again, for the people in the back, the dark skinned the dark skinned Hebrews found great beauty in a clear complexion. All right. So again, one more time, the dark skinned Hebrews found great beauty in a clear complexion. And again, let me go back here to this slide here. It says this: the Hebrew and Greek words are all usual words for red or to be red. This is telling us the biblical usage of the word ruddy. All right, let's fast forward again. So again, the dark-skinned Hebrews found great beauty in a clear complexion. All right, so let's deal with the etymology of the word rosy. All right, it says Of what? Healthy complexion, cheerful, promising. So the key is what? Of healthy complexion. All right. So from the 14th century to the 15th century, 1590s, of healthy complexion. All right. That's what it means. Healthy complexion, healthy skin. So white, tazaka, and ruddy, adawam, simply means amazing, beautiful skin. Let me say that again. White and ruddy simply means amazing, beautiful skin. Tazaka adamawanai or tazaka admanai. All right. So again, white and ruddy simply means amazing, beautiful skin. Now I could stop right there, but I'm going to take it even further. Verse 11, Songs of Solomon, chapter 5. His head is as the most fine gold. His locks are bushy and black. And we're going to highlight that word bushy, thalyam, and black, shakar as a raven. But notice it said that he had locks. All right. He had locks. So all through the scriptures, we see Israelites having locks, the priests having locks. Numbers chapter 6, you see locks. All right. So let's deal with this some more. His locks are bushy. All right. So the Hebrew definition of bushy, thal yam, it says this: by reduplication through the idea of vibration or a trailing bow, bushy. Then we see in the sub entry number 1, we see wavy. All right. So here it is, a trailing bow, bushy. That's what this word thal, and you see here tal, but this is what it means, bushy. But let's go to the primitive root word. The primitive root word definition means a mound to pile up. Now think about how, for the most part, our people, when our skin, when our hair locks up, it looks like what? A pile. It looks like a mound. Okay. So it says here, a mound to pile up. The primitive root word is thal, right? Thalal, rather. And so it means a mound piled up, right? So his locks are like a mound, a pile of hair. All right. His locks are like a mound, a pile of hair. That's what it actually means. Locks were very popular among ancient Israel. Numbers chapter 6, verse 5 says this: all the days of the vow of his separation, there shall no razor come upon his head until the days be fulfilled, in the which he separated himself unto Yahweh. He shall be holy, in other words, quadash, and shall let the locks of his hair of his head grow. All right, it says, shall let the locks of the hair of his head grow. So we see that, guess what? Locks were popular, right? That was the norm. And I'm pretty confident that the Hebrew Israelite Messiah had locks. Okay, so let's deal with another scripture. Judges chapter 16, verse 13. It says, and Delilah said unto Samson, hitherto thou hast mocked me and told me lies. Tell me wherewith thou mightest be bound. And he said unto her, if thou weavest the 7 locks of my head with the web. All right. So we see Samson having what? Locks, bush, locks. All right. Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 3. And he put forth the form of an hand and took me by what? A lock of mine head. Let me say that again. And he put forth the form of an hand and took me by a lock of mine head. Now, what we see in the Jewish community today, we see the curls. You know how they have the little curls there? You know, that one little curl that's on both sides of the head. That is not locks. That's not the biblical locks that we see here. That's not the biblical locks. See, if we don't do certain things to our hair, quite naturally, they will lock. All right. That's just a fact. All right. So we see here, they Ezekiel saying the Most High took on what? Uh, um, took his hair, a lock of his hair, right, to direct him. He pulled on one of his locks, right? And it said, the Spirit lifted me up between the earth and the heaven and brought me in the vision of Alahayim to Jerusalem. All right. So the Europeans are the ones that added the word dread to locks. See, we've been, unfortunately, even in the church and even among many within our community, when they see locks, right, they call it what? Dreadlocks. And they are suppressing something that's part of our culture. It's all through the scriptures. And see how you guys can defend this is by showing scripture. This is your this is your culture. This is your, if you want to use the term at your job, religious beliefs. And you can show them this with the scriptures, and they have to honor this. But most of us don't know this, do not know that this is in the scriptures. So again, the Europeans added the word dread to locks. They're the ones that put the word dread there. But let's go further here. I'm not going to stop here. So, etymology definition of Rastafarian. All right. It says here, uh, from Rastafari, Jamaican religion built around writings of Marcus Garvey and belief that Haile Selassie, former emperor of Ethiopia, in other words, Kush, was God, right? It goes on to say from Rastafari, Selassie's title from 1916 to his ascension in 1936, from Amharic, Ras, in other words, chief head, all right? And Tafari means to be feared. All right. So let's deal with the etymology of the word dreadlocks. This is what it says. All right. It says here, from the 1960s, from dread, the adjective, and we see locks, combination word. The style is said to be based on the that of East African warriors, so called from the dread they presumably arouse in beholders. But Rastafarian dread also has a sense of fear of the Lord. Now, if we understand history, guess what? The Europeans, right? They were scared when they began to what? Come up with a plan to go into Ethiopia to what? Overtake Selassie, right? They came across these warriors that was willing to what? Fight and stand and die for Selassie. And so they were fearful when they saw them what? These saw these soldiers with these locks. It intimidated them. So that's why you see the term dread at the beginning is because of what? The Europeans being fearful of these warriors protecting Selassie. All right. But nevertheless, let's move forward. Right. So from the dread they presumably arouse and beholders, in other words, fear, because of just how powerful just seeing them, the view of them, just the power that just the look, the appearance, it what put what fear in the hearts of those that tried to come against them. All right. So those beholders were the Europeans. I'll say it again. Those beholders were the Europeans. I never had. Can you remember if you ever had fear of someone that had locks in their head in our community? Think about that. I know I never had fear. I don't know anyone that had fear of someone with locks. Unfortunately, within the church, growing up, some really taught or spoke against having locks. It's because of what was what improperly taught, and many don't even understand that that is part of our culture. Not just Israelites, but those that are from the continent of Africa at one time was called Kush, right? And this territory, Guess what? It was common in other cultures, not just ours, to have locks. That's a fact. Okay. So let's move forward. So this person, right? This Microsoft guy, when I was pouring this information onto him, he said this: please prove to me that Moses was a very dark man. He said that to me. After all what I shared with you, I shared with him. His response was, if you could prove to me that Moses was a very dark Shakar man, then I'll reconsider. I'll change my stand. Pretty easy, right? But let's go to Exodus chapter 2, verse 9 and 10. It says this: and Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, take this child away and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages. And the woman took the child. Excuse me, let me get some of this water here. My voice is getting dry. Hold on one second. All right, let me read it again. And Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, take this child away and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages. And the woman took the child and nursed it. All right. It goes on to say, verse 10, and the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses. And she said, because I drew him out of the water. All right. So let's see what the Hebrew definition says of Moses. All right. Masha. Let's see what it says. All right. It means to what? To pull out, draw out. All right. That's what Masha means. But we're going to go even further with this. I want to properly explain this to you. All right. This is coming from Near East studies of the name Moses. This is coming from a publication, Near Eastern Studies, Volume 2, October 1953, number 4, the Egyptian derivation of the name Moses. It says this: the abbreviation Mose also occurs independently in Egypt. It should not be that the second consonant of Hebrew in Hebrew name is a sheen, as in Moshe, right? And that the Egyptian verb, um, we'll just go with Mose, right, is found also in the Old Testament in the name Ramses. However, the Egyptians, let me read it again. The abbreviation Mose also occurs independently in Egyptian. It should be not that the second consonant in Hebrew name is Sheen, right? Because when you start dealing with Israeli Hebrew versus ancient Hebrew, in ancient Hebrew, right, it's just pronounced what? The Shan, and it always makes the what? The Shah sound, the Shah sound. In Israeli Hebrew, right, the Seen and the Sheen, depending on what place that Nakud, that mark is on, if it's on the left, then it makes the S sound. If it's on the right, it makes a sh sound. But that's not so in ancient Hebrew. Ancient Hebrew, it's unambiguous, right? But anyway, so it goes on to say, and that the Egyptian verb mose is found also in the Old Testament in the name Ramses. Where, however, the Egyptian verbal form in the original name is a perfect participle. And we see the Ra, the Ma, and we see the Shah, right? And we see the where it says Ray is he that born him. All right. So let's delve into this a little bit more so you get an understanding of what Moses mean from an Egyptian perspective. The word Moses, right, or Mose in Egyptian means son or born. It is a very common element in Egyptian theophoric names such as Tutmoses, which means son of, Thutmoses, which is son of Thot, or Thot is born. Ramses, son of Ra. Moses, son of Ah. right? So understand this. Moses' name, right? If it was from within the Egyptian culture, you'll see it means son of, and it will identify whatever um, bloodline that person comes out of. But in Moses' case, it could not mean son of because he did not come out of the Egyptian culture. So we see here that um, Pharaoh's daughter gave him this name, but guess what? This is where we get into loan words. Cultures use loan words. So from a Hebraic perspective, she even redefined the name by saying taken out of what? The water. So in Moses' case, it simply means son or born. His name lacks, or I'm not going to get into all that because I want to keep it simple. So Our Moses or Our Masha, right? That's how you pronounce it in ancient Hebrew. Our Masha, the father of the 18th dynasty. Let's go there. This is coming from the Britannica. It says, Our Moses the first, king of ancient Egypt and founder of the 18th dynasty, who completed the expulsion of the Hyksos, invaded Palestine, and re exerted Egypt's hegemony over northern Nubia to the south. So we see that here it says our Moses is from what? The 18th dynasty. All right, the 18th dynasty. That's important. Let's deal with some hidden facts about the 18th dynasty. The ancient Egyptians wore wigs with locks. Let me say that again. The ancient Egyptians wore wigs with locks. And here's an image that's from the Britain Museum, right? Egyptian wig and wig box found in ancient Egyptian tomb and in an Egyptian tomb. And this is some close-ups of it. They had locks. This does not look like a Caucasian set of locks, Caucasian braids or European braids, put it that way. These are Negro locks that we see here. All right. And oftentimes when they would you make their wigs, they would either use a sheep or they would use our hair. Now, and I'm not going to get too deep in it. We'll deal with the Egyptian portion of it when we start dealing with indentured servitude and all those things. We'll deal with that another time. But this is what I showed that guy from Microsoft, and his mouth dropped. I said, here it is. We see our Moses, right? And we see the 18th dynasty. Here's wigs from the 18th dynasty. Look at the hair texture, right? So again, remember, bush, thal yam means a trailing bow. In other words, a pile of hair. Let's go back here. Doesn't that look like a pile of hair? Doesn't that look like bushes? A bush? All right. So thal yam, bow. So again, the primitive definition means a mound to pile up. Thal lao. All right. So here's some references, all right, about the Egyptians. All right. I didn't put the name up in. Let me see if I did. Nope, I didn't put the name up here. All right. Oh, this is just the writing on the image that I've displayed. So just reiterating the point, a photograph of an Egyptian wig for a lady in the style of the 18th dynasty. In other words, the 1400 BC, and also a wig box made of cash or writing reeds discovered in a tomb at the Thebes. But we see the wig right here again. See that right there? There's the wig, and you see locks on there. All right. Now, this is a video. All right. And I'll play it real quick. Let me see if it'll play. No, I didn't play. Let me go back. This is a video that I have here. You're not going to be able to hear the audio, but this is a video of the wigs, the Egyptian wigs in the museum overseas in Britain. I'll just play it. Right. And you're going to see it looks just like what? Our hair. You look at it. That's the wig that's on that they took pictures of. That is a Negro. That's Negro wigs right there. Negro hair right there. That's our hair. All right. These are the Egyptians. See, it's so easy to debunk even the descriptions of the Egyptians. All we have to do is just take the time out to research and study. But look at those wigs. Look at those wigs. Come on now. Our daughter had her afro out looking just like that over the weekend. Over the weekend. All right. So again, here's some other images. Okay. Now the image on the right, because of the chemicals or whatever the solution that they use when they mummified our people or mummified people, right? It caused the hair to straighten up. So the wig on the right on your screen, uh, notice the tips is still locked, but because of the solution they use, it caused the locks to straighten up. All right, so look at that. You see where I'm going now with this, guys. I'm giving you some information on how to properly articulate and break down who the Hebrew Israelite Messiah is. Because the scripture tells us that he fled to where? Egypt to hide, far as in terms of Mary and Joseph. So Mary and Joseph blended in with the Egyptians in their appearance, along with the Hebrew Israelite Messiah. Okay, so this is so easy to debunk this. All right. So I hope this is helping you guys. So these wigs date back to the 18th dynasty. So let's see what Aristotle said about the Ethiopians and as well as the Egyptians. This is 320 BCE. Those who are too black are coward-like. For instance, the Egyptians and Ethiopians. But those who are excessively white are also cowards, as we can see from the example of women. So here, they're making it clear that the Egyptians and the Ethiopians are what? Dark melanated people. All right. Apollodorus, 70 century, 70 BCE. He said, affirms that the Egyptos conquered the country of the black-footed ones and called it Egypt after himself. All right. This is another reference showing that the Egyptians are dark melanated people. Herodotus, excuse me, Herodotus, what some would say Herodotus, I'll just say Herodotus, excuse the mix up here. But Herodotus, 450 BCE, he says this: several Egyptians told me that in their opinion, the Colchidians were descendants from soldiers of Sesostris. I had conjectured as much myself from two pointers. Firstly, because they have what? Black skin. And notice how he describes their hair: kinky hair. He says, firstly, because they have black skin and kinky hair, just like what we saw in the wigs, the examples of the wigs. So, this whitewashing that we see of the Egyptian culture starts with this guy, Zahi Hawass. And if you guys don't have it as a reference, purchase the book called Black Genesis. It's a great book, a lot of great information in there. But the whitewashing of ancient Egypt is points to this guy right here, Zahi Hawass. All right. So again, let's go back and let's tie all of this in. The description of the Hebrew Israelite Messiah. All right. Let's tie this in. So it says his head and his hair was white. Remember that word tazaka or saka, right? Means what? Here, amazing. All right. So it says his head and his hair were white like wool. When you understand the word like, right? The word like means having the characteristics of. Then we see wool, tazamar, right? Or samar, as white, tazaka, as snow, shalag. All right. So this is just shutting this down right here. So it's saying his head and his hairs were white. In other words, amazing, like wool. Had the what characteristics of wool, as white, amazing as what snow, and his eyes were as a flame of fire. Now understand this: you have John, one of his disciples, describing the Hebrew Israelite Messiah. The reason why he's saying it's amazing because they know what happened to him when he was tortured, when he was lynched. So then he's making it clear that there was no blemishes in his skin. There was no issue with his hair. He was fine, no issues. So his head and his hair were white like wool, had the characteristics of what? Wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were as a flame of fire. All right. I jumped ahead here, but this is what the word like means: having the same characteristics or quality. Let me say that again: having the same characteristics or quality. That's what the word like means: having the same characteristics or quality. All right. So again, it says his head and his hairs were white like wool. Greek definition of hair. All right. This is what it says. It says uh, hair, all right, thrix or threeks, right? Hair. That's what it means, hair. Okay, so threeks is comparable with kome, right? So let's deal with the Greek definition of kome. All right, this is what it says. All right, matter of fact, let me go back here. Let me make sure I take my time with here. All right, we see kome here. All right, so let me read it again. It says hair compare, and then we see kome, right? Um, so the word hair in this text is comparable to kome, right? That's what it says here. And we see what it says pronounced threeks. All right, let's go back here. All right, now let's go to this Greek definition of kome. This is what it says: locks. Oh my gosh, we could stop right there. What does it say? Locks. In other words, a pile of hair. All right. Let's see. I see a question here by Pastor Rabbi Stansbury. Did the person you had this discussion with leave you with a changed mind or still believing the olive color version? Unfortunately, Pastor Moray, he still left with wanting to believe what he wanted to believe. How he ended this discussion. He said he just have to just pray on it and let the Holy Spirit talk to him and do some more do further research. So it was a lot of, I mean, he just wasn't expecting the response that he got from me. All right. So we see here kome, locks. We could stop right there. Kome, locks. It says the hair of the head, locks. All right. Pile, right? Bush. Okay. So kome, right, means the hair of the head, locks. So remember, Solomon's locks are like a mound, a pile of hair. All right. I'll say it again. Solomon's locks are like a mound, a pile of hair. All right. Now there's the example right there. You see it on your screen, right? Now, if that looks like a mound of hair, a mound of locks, a mound of Negro hair, hit the one in the timeline here in the chat. We'll stop right here to give you a chance to respond. All right. So if this looks like one, looks like locks, if it looks like a pile, if it looks like a bush, type one right now if you're in agreement. If you disagree, type two. All right. I'm going somewhere with this. Okay. All right. So I see ones. Everyone agree that this looks like what? A pile of what? Locks. All right. It looks like what? Bushes. Okay. Now let's tie this all together. Going back, Revelation says his head and his hairs were white like what? Wool. Had the what? Characteristics. It said his hair was what? Amazing, right? And had the characteristics of what? Wool. Okay. Let me break this down some more. Let's go back to this image here, right? This pile of hair, this pile of wool, this pile of locks, right? Everyone said that this looks like what? Our hair, a pile of locks. Now let me break this down real quick. what you see, this is a transposed image. I purposely did this so that way you can see the comparison of the texture of this hair that you see in this image is just like yours, just like mine's. All right. Now, let me show you the actual image. That is the actual image of a sheep in Israel, right? And you see that hair looks just like our hair. That's why it says amazing, like what? Like wool, having the characteristics, white like what? Snow. Now we're dealing with what? The glory. When you see white like snow, it's referring to what? The glory. All right. So you see the sheep hair you thought was what? A pile of what? Locks of our own hair, when it's actually, this is a sheep right here. It looks just like the image or the short video I showed, right? That looks like what the wigs that you saw from the 18th dynasty. All right. So again, as white as snow, let's go to Mark chapter 9, verse 2 and 3. Let's deal with the white as snow characteristics, right? After 6 days, Jesus, Yahweh Shai, taketh with him Peter, James, John, and leadeth them up into an high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. Verse 3, and his raiment became shining, exceeding what? White as snow. In other words, amazing as snow, so as no fuller on earth can white them. So that's what he's describing is what the glory that he saw on the Hebrew Israelite Messiah. So remember, Hebraic white means amazing, tazaka or saka, right? The Hebrew word for white means amazing, right? So we just broke that down real quick, right? We just dealt with the hair, and I hope that portion of it gives you more clarity. Now let's deal with the skin complexion. All right. And then we'll close out with one area that I haven't heard anyone talk about is the voice as the sound of many waters. We're going to deal with that portion, but let's deal with the feet like unto fine brass. Remember, the word like means having the characteristics, right? So I want you to make sure fine brass as if they burned in a furnace, right? So having the characteristics of what? Fine brass as if they burned in a furnace. All right. Verse 18, and unto the angel, right? We're going to see this again. This is chapter 2, because it wasn't just said one time. This was said more than once inside the book of Revelation. This is chapter 18, verse 18 of chapter 2. It says, and unto the angel of the church in Thyatira, right? These things saith the son of Elohim, who hath his eyes like unto what? A flame of fire, and his feet unto what? Are like fine brass. So we see this is what? Reiterated in the scriptures. So they want to make it clear there's a reason why it's there not once, but twice. Guys, go beyond your studying, go further, go deeper. Because guess what? The reason why it had to put it there twice, because in Deuteronomy chapter 17, this is what the two witnesses, 2 or 3 witnesses, that's how a thing can be established, right? And the Hebrew Israelite Messiah, that's why he always sent his disciples out what? In twos, so that way they can confirm each other, right? And so here we see it there twice, so that way it what? Bears witness of each other. Okay. So his feet like unto fine brass is actually copper, nakashath. All right. Nakashath, right? His feet like unto fine brass is actually copper. And let's deal with the Hebrew definition of copper. All right. We see it says here brazen, brass, chain, copper, fetter, in other words, of brass, filthiness, steel. But we're going to hone in on those highlighted words here: brazen, brass, chain, copper, fetter. Okay. So Let's deal with the etymology of the word brass. And this is important for you to catch this right here. It says this: yellow, malleable alloy metal, harder than copper. All right. It goes on to say, Old English, we see brazed, in other words, brass, bronze. But let's go down here. It says a mystery word with no known cognates beyond English. Wait a minute. This word brass is a mystery word that has, it says, with no known cognates beyond the English language, right? Beyond the English. See, this is why I say words have meanings. And I'm going to do, before we go to chapter 2 of Revelation, we're going to deal with, I'm going to teach a lesson called The Deception of the English Language. And we'll do this next Sunday. The deception of the English language. And I'm going to show you just how influential this language is to help push the delusions that or in the poor understandings of the text. So it says here again, yellow malleable alloy metal harder than copper. Okay, it goes on to say, all right, perhaps akin to French brazier, which means to brew. But then it goes on to say, but no sure connection can be made. And then it goes on to say, itself of obscure origin. Say this word of itself is of what? Obscure origins, right? And then said words for brass in other languages, has such as German, right? But then it goes on to say also tend to be difficult to explain, right? You see where I'm going at? It says it's difficult to explain as brass was unknown in early antiquity. Wait a minute. It's saying that brass antiquity during the time of the Hebrew Israelite Messiah, this term brass was unknown. Y'all better grab hold of this. This brass, this word, this term, this metal was unknown during that time. So it goes on to say the use of the English word in Bible translations, etc., likely means bronze, right? And then you can use the term copper, which you look at, especially some of the older pennies. What color does they turn? Do they turn when they began to that shine began to wear off? All right. So it goes on to say, when works of Greeks in Roman antiquity and brass began to be critically examined in their material discriminant, the Italian word for brass came into use to distinguish this ancient brass from the current allat. All right. So again, it says it's about brass, a mystery word with no known cognates beyond English. So let's compare this with the etymology dictionary for as because I have my etymology dictionary. We're going to do a comparison, and I'm going to show you how you have to make sure you have references, not just one reference, but a backup reference, witnesses. So I have an etymology dictionary. One of the ones, I have a couple of them, but one of the ones that I have that that I use to compare is called the Barnhart Concise Dictionary of Etymology, The Origins of American English Words. It's a great book. I encourage you guys to purchase it. So when you're reading some of the etymology words online, at least you can compare it to there. All right. So this is what it says, right? It says here, right? Probably about 1200 brass, but it goes on to say originally meaning an alloy of copper and tin, now called bronze, of uncertain origin, copper penny. All right. Now, so far, it doesn't look like anything is different here, forward in manner. But let's go ahead and compare the two here. All right. Let's compare. The online etymology dictionary includes yellow. That's what you did not see in what I just showed you from the Earnhardt's etymology dictionary. The etymology dictionary online included yellow. It said yellow malleable alloy metal harder than copper. You see how it's painting the picture that lighter is stronger. Yellow, right? Remember when we start dealing with the definition of olive, or should I say green, in Genesis chapter 1, right? We see there that yellow is the color of sickly vegetation. But we see here it says yellow is saying that it's stronger or harder than copper. See, words have meaning, but you have to make sure you confirm references. I've been recommending the etymology dictionary for years online, but I also, in our assembly among the ministers, I make sure and I encourage them to get hard copies so that way they can do the comparison. Because there are things that I can show you that is suspect on how it's defined online. All right. So it says unknown. Now, with my next slide, unknown facts about copper, nakashaf. Unknown facts about copper. Let's deal with it. This is coming from Vice. The Statue of Liberty was originally intended to celebrate the end of American slavery. Now, if you understand the Statue of Liberty, what you see today is not the original Statue of Liberty that was initially drawn up. They thought that they were going to, well, actually, the original Statue of Liberty was actually an Egyptian, if I remember correctly. I'll get all of that down. I may have it here, but it was an Egyptian statue. But they changed the appearance because they knew that in America they was not going to have a melanated or a Negro woman standing introducing people into this country, especially when our people was enslaved. So Edouard de Laboulaye, French abolitionist, and president of the French Anti-Slavery Society, is in the disputed father of the Statue of Liberty. Is the undisputed. Excuse me if I'm messing up with these words, fumbling over these words. My mouth is dry, so forgive me. So is the undisputed father of the Statue of Liberty. After the United States Civil War, Laboulaye conceived the idea of a gift to the United States to memorialize President Abraham Lincoln and celebrate the end of slavery. His enlisted sculptor, Frederic Auguste Bartholdi, who took an unused design he created for a lighthouse near the Suez Canal and turned it into a monument for America in the 20 years it took between the conception and the statue dedication in 1886. It goes on to say, in the summer of 1871, Bartholdi traveled to the United States. He brought with him some sketches of a new statue that were loosely based on the Egyptian sketches, but were more Greco-Roman, since that was more appropriate for a Western country like the United States. All right. So you're getting clarity here. Let me go back here. I hit this accidentally, but you're getting clarity that the original sketches of the Statue of Liberty, it says here, loosely based on the Egyptian sketches, right? But were more Greco-Roman, all right, European, since that was more appropriate for a Western country like the United States, especially how our people were being treated and still being treated. Okay. So what is the original color of the Statue of Liberty? All right, let's deal with this. All right, this is another article here, but it says, according to Dr. Jim Haskins, a prolific Black author, what stimulated the idea for the creation of the statue initially was the part that Black soldiers played in the ending of Black African bondage in the United States. It was created in the mind of the French historian Edouard de Laboulaye, chairman of the, all right, didn't put the rest of that there, but it goes on to say, it is true that the original face of the statue was dark in color. However, the material underneath the familiar green finish is copper. Let me say that again. The material underneath the familiar greenish finish is copper, which is a dark metal. Due to exposure to the elements, the statue's head soon turned pitch black. So that explains the picture published in the New York Post in 1896 showing the statue with a black face. Okay, so the material underneath the familiar green finish is copper, which is a dark metal. So I put this here so you get a better understanding that when we say in the word brass, it's actually referring to copper, bronze. So we getting a better understanding that it's what? A dark metal. No matter how we try to massage the history and facts, it is what? A dark metal. Okay. So is this why many are willing to accept the olive green as the complexion for the Hebrew Israelite Messiah? Right? That's a good question, right? But again, we debunked it, right? Regardless of the reasoning, I just proved to you his skin complexion. So, what is the complexion of the Hebrew Israelite Messiah? Again, it says here in my notes here, right? The Hebrew Israelite Messiah skin complexion is fine bronze that was what? Burned in a furnace. In other words, it had the what? Characteristics, right? Of bronze burnt in a furnace, copper that burnt in the furnace. And we already said that copper is already what? Naturally is a what? Dark metal. Okay. And there's an image of the Hebrew Israelite Messiah, a crucifix, an image that is made over in Italy in one of the what? Cathedrals there. And notice the depiction. Look at the nose. Look at the jawbones. Look at this chin. Look at the color, right? This is a bronze statue, all right? It does not look like what we see of the images of the Hebrew Israelite Messiah, the Caucasian images. All right. So again, remember, copper is a dark metal. So was Christ an Arab or have Arab skin complexion? Because when you hear that term, right, green or olive, they are trying to refer to him having the complexion of what we see today, of what the Arabs that we see today. So I want to give you um, some more scholarly information here. I want to give you some more primary sources that's going to completely debunk a lot of the poor teachings that we see. The Hebrew Israelite Messiah did not look like the Arabs that we see today. The Arabs that we see today are not the original people that are in the territory. That's why um, even when you see some of the literature that you see today, they tell you you cannot compare the Palestinians to the Philistines, the Palestinians of today versus the Philistines of old, right? And then you start seeing the wondrous, now I'm not even going to say wondrous, you start seeing the works of the Romans when you see the term changing from Philistine to Palestine. All right. But nevertheless, was Christ, the Hebrew Israelite Messiah, an Arab or have an Arab skin complexion? Let's deal with this. Outlines of ancient Egyptian history. And I hope this helps you guys. All right. Outlines of ancient history. All right. This is an article, a publication back in 1892. It says here, how often do we see in Eastern monarchies and even in European states a difference of origins between the ruling class to which the royal family belongs and the mass of the people? We need to leave Western Asia and Egypt. It goes on to say, no, it says we need not, excuse me, we need not leave Western Asia and Egypt. We find there Turks ruling over nations to the race of which they do not belong. Let me read that again. I hope y'all grab hold of this. It says, how often do we see in Eastern monarchies and even in European states a difference of origin between the ruling class to which the royal family belongs and the mass of the people? We need not leave Western Asia and Egypt. We find the Turks ruling over nations to the race of which they do not belong. Right. So this is making it clear that the Turks that you see right now in Egypt are not the original people. This is telling you, and this is history, that just because you see a ruling body, right, over a particular territory does not mean that they're aboriginal to the territory. Right now, the ruling body in Israel right now is what? Is the Germans, which is what the Khazars, or excuse me, the now I can't even think of it now. The Ashkenazi, the Jews, right? They are not the original people there. They are not aboriginal to the territory. So that's a perfect example there. But this article goes on to say, although they have adopted their religion in the same way as the Turks of Baghdad, who are Finns, now reign over Semites. Oh man, this I hope y'all grab hold of this. Although they have adopted their religion, right? Taking on the practices of that culture of the community that they conquered in the same way as the Turks of Baghdad, who are Finns, now reign over Semites. Uh-oh, y'all grab hold of this. Turanian kings may have led into Egypt and governed a population of mixed origin where the Semitic elements were prevalent. Uh-oh, now we're starting to get into the Negro, right? See that anyway. So this is not dealing with, when we see Semitic, this is not dealing with the Jewish community as we know today. Y'all got to understand this. This is right here is telling you that, guess what? The word Semitic is not a word that should be used strictly interchangeably with the modern Jews that we see today. Semitic is anyone that's a descendant of Shem. Now, that term Semitic was also used as what? To group languages together. That's a whole nother discussion. But a population of mixed origins where the Semitic element was prevalent. If we consider the mixing up of races, which took place in Mesopotamia in remote ages, the invasion which the country had to suffer, the repeated conflicts of which it was the theater, there is nothing extraordinary that populations coming out of this land should have presented a variety of races and origins. All right. But let me give you another piece of reference here. This is coming from the Journal of Cambrian Archaeological Association. All right. This is what it says. All right. Mr. Baldwin draws a marked distinction between the modern Mohammedan Semitic population of Arabia and their great Cushite, Hamite, or Ethiopian predecessors. The former, he says, are comparatively modern in Arabia. Modern in Arabia, they have appropriated the reputation of the old race and have unduly occupied the chief attention of modern scholars. So this is telling you that again, this is where we start understanding the word Caucasian. This is where we start understanding modern Arabs versus the biblical Arabs, the ancient Arabs. We'll start getting an understanding that what we see today is not the original people. That's what this article is saying here. All right. So again, it says the former, he says, are comparatively modern in Arabia. They have appropriated the reputation of the old race. In other words, when we say reputation, the heritage, the land, the families, the tongues, the culture. That's what the Greeks had done. And Josephus make it clear that the Greeks began to what? Change names of key monuments, key things, key people, key language. All they began to change all of that and put it into their what? Their language, so that way they can rewrite history and put themselves in front of it. Okay. So let's go ahead and wrap this up here. We got one more area to cover. I know I'm giving you a lot of information, but let's go to Revelation chapter 1, verse 15. His feet like unto fine brass, as if they burned in the furnace, and his voice as the sound of many waters. All right. So we broke down, I proved to you which scripture and other references, right, that the Hebrew Israelite Messiah had locks that looked like a bush, pile of hair, and he also had dark skin. Not olive, but dark skin. Let's deal with this third piece. His voice as the sound of many waters. starting with the understanding of Phineas. This is coming from Exodus chapter 6, verse 25. All right. And Eleazar, Aaron's son, took him one of the daughters of Peor to wife, and she bare him Phineas. These are the heads of the fathers of the Levites according to their families. So now we see that Aaron have a grandson by the name of Phineas. Okay, now we're going to break this down here. Phineas was a common name among the priests. Let's go to 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 3. And this man went up out of the city early to worship and to sacrifice unto Yahweh and host of Shiloh, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni, and Phinehas. All right. Payanakas, the priests of Yahweh, were there. So we see that Phinehas is a popular name among who? The priests, among the Levites. Right. So let's deal with the definition of Phinehas. This is the Eastern Bible Dictionary definition of Phinehas. This is 1897, this particular published dictionary. It says Phineas, mouth of brass, right? Mouth of brass, right? Remember that word brass, but we'll deal with it. And it says from old Egypt. What does it say? The Negro. Phineas what? The Negro. So we see that name was popular among what? The Levitical priests. So this name right here completely shuts down the Caucasian image, or should I say the lack of pigmentation and non-pigmentation of the depiction of what we see of Israel today. Right? They were dark melanated people. So we see here the mouth of brass from old Egypt. It says what? The Negro. All right. And it gives you a number of people who had this name. Okay. But let's go ahead and deal with this some more. Phineas, Negro, mouth of brass, the Negro. All right. Definition of Phineas, and from the Hebraic perspective, it says here, mouth of a serpent, the name of 3 Israelites. And we're going to break down the mouth of the serpent. When we see brass, that's not referring to metal. That is referring to what? Boldness. That is referring to strength and power in his words. And we're going to confirm that. It goes on to say, right, it gives us some different names here, as far as Eleazar, grandson of Aaron, right, which was Moses' grandnephew. His zealousness for Yahweh averted a plague on Israel. That's the key right there. We're going to go there. Then we see a priest of the son of Eli. Then we see a father of a helper of Ezra. Okay. So Phineas means mouth of brass, mouth of the serpent. Let's go to Numbers chapter 25, verse 13, as we wrap this up. And he shall have it, and his seed after him, even the covenant of an everlasting priesthood, because he was zealous for Elohim, right? And made an atonement for the children of Israel, right? So again, it says his zealousness for Yahweh averted a plague on Israel. He stood bold. And let's break this down. Let's go to Numbers chapter 1, verse 1 through 3. It says this. Let's go to the beginning of chapter 25. And Israel abode in Shittim, and the people began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab. This is saying that the men began to what? Mix and mingle with the daughters of Moab. And we're going to break down Moab on another presentation, but we're not going to do it tonight. But again, it goes on. Verse 2 says, and they called the people into the sacrifices of their gods, and the people did eat and bowed down to their gods. Verse 3, and Israel joined himself unto Baal Peor, and the anger of Yahweh was kindled against Israel. So let's break this down. So Israel was camped in the plains of Moab along the Jordan River, right across the great city of Jericho. The area was called Shittim. Balaam, the false prophet, the diviner and sorcerer, was unable to call down a curse upon Israel. And so he came up with a satanic plan. Balaam suggests to the king of Moab to have the Moabite women seduce the Israelite men into sexual perversion. Y'all got to understand, especially men, we got to understand the importance of staying within our what? Community. Because you don't know what kind of what angles that the enemy will come at us by using what? Women of other what? Cultures to come in and penetrate our community. The power of a woman is real. I grew up in Newark, New Jersey. I've seen how a brother killed another brother over a woman. I've seen father kill sons and vice versa over what? A woman. And Nehemiah had to what? Annul marriages because the men began to what? Mix with other cultures. Other cultures, especially that didn't believe in the Hebrew Israelite Messiah. The children of Ammon, the children of Moab, which is what? The descendants of Lot in his inappropriate relationship with his daughters, and produce what is called a bastard seed. So they began to what? Marry within communities, daughters of communities that have made a vow. Psalms, the 83rd book of Psalms, that pledge that they are going to what? Make sure Israel's name become no more. They pledged, they signed a constitution, they created a confederacy, they created an alliance among themselves. All the enemies of Israel, they pledged this. And so we see Balaam suggesting to the king of Moab to have the Moabite women seduce the Israelite men into sexual perversion as a way of what? So that way the Most High will what? Turn his face away from his people, punish them. See that Israel is disgusting, right? Want to be the accuser of the brother. Say, look what happened. Look at the so-called holy men of Israel. Look at what they're doing. So he told them to what? Send women over into to seduce the men. All right. So again, let's wrap this up. He suggested that this perhaps would arouse the anger of Elohim against the Israelites, causing Yah to judge them and curse them. Once they were enslaved to sex, the women could invite them to their festivals of worship, encouraging them to join in the worship of their gods. And we see a lot of this happening today. We see a lot of our brothers who's intermingling with the very people that have enslaved you. And then now you're taking on what? A lot of their culture, a lot of the ways that they view things, including your own people. And you're wondering why you are suffering from what is called cognitive dissonance. In other words, contradictory behavior. And then you go into what is called the Stockholm syndrome, whereas though you're protecting the perpetrator. All right. So once they were enslaved to sex, the women could invite them to their festivals of worship. That's what happened to King Ahab, encouraging them to join in the worship of their gods. Wrapping this up, let's deal with the worship of Baal Peor. Let me break this down real quick. All right. He is called the Lord of the Cleft, Phoenician phallic god. When they say phallic, this is worshiping body parts, the male reproductive organ. Phoenician phallic god coupled with Asherah's yonic cleft. In other words, this is what? An image of what? A sexual image. In Hinduism, they call it the Kali dance of death, which is a sexual ritual, right? You'll see the hexagram. That hexagram is what this is describing right here, right? The Phoenician phallic, right? Coupled with Asherah's yonic cleft. Right, that is sex right there. That is sexual prostitution, or what they would call sacred prostitution. Israelites adopted his cult and celebrate. Excuse me. Israelites adopted his cult and celebrated sexual rites in his honor in the tabernacle of Yahweh's reformers, or Yahweh's reformers killed the celebrant. Baal Peor symbol was a palm tree. That's why you have to understand the palm tree, right? The palm tree that you see described in Jeremiah 10, right? And we could get into the Christmas tree and all that other stuff, but that palm tree, that tree represents in this text a phallus. right? And a phallus is phallic worship. It's a male reproductive organ. All right. Between two stones, a male genital symbol, recalling the phallic god of Egypt, Osiris, whose worship prayed to achieve erections like a palm trees. I know it's a little graphic here, not trying to disrespect anyone here, but I hope you guys see the severity of why and what happened to these men. But let's describe Phineas in this text. All right. So the Moabite women seduced the men of Israel into immorality, and even some of the husbands into committing adultery. Yah was angered because Israel had committed sexual immorality and indulged in false worship. Yah's justice against sin had to be executed, and consequently, he sent a plague. In other words, he sent a incurable disease. He sent a venereal disease. He sent a disease that was incurable, that cost the life of almost 25,000 men. All right, so let's deal with the Hebrew definition of plague. All right, this is what it says. It says a pestilent. All right, a pestilent stroke, but a pestilent. All right, that's key. A pestilent. I'll say it again. A pestilent. All right. So plague, all right, magapa simply means pestilent. All right. So they sent them what? An incurable disease. And we could say that this is AIDS of its time. Right. So again, pestilent, it means the etymology of it, plague, epidemic, infected, deadly disease, plague, pest. All right. All right. So again, pestilent, magapa means epidemic, infected, deadly disease. So 24,000 Israelite men died from a deadly sexually transmitted disease. Let's go to verse 10 of Numbers chapter 25, and we're going to wrap this up here. And Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, had turned away my wrath from the children of Israel. Uh-oh, now we're starting to get the description, and this is going to tie in with them, the mouth of the Hebrew Israelite Messiah that it was describing. We're going to, here it is right here. Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, have turned away my wrath away from the children of Israel, while he was zealous for my sake among them, that I consume not the children of Israel in my jealousy. Verse 12, there, wherefore say, behold, hey, ha, pay attention. That's the actual pronunciation in Hebrew, ha, pay attention. I give unto him my covenant of what? Peace. The Most High said, I give to Phinehas the covenant of peace. And that covenant, he said, I'm entering into an agreement right now with Phinehas. And here's the agreement. And he shall have it, and his seeds after him, even the covenant of an everlasting priesthood, because he was zealous for his Elohim and made an atonement for the children of Israel. Uh-oh. So mouth, pi, is the primitive root to Phineas, right? And this is what it means. The mouth, specifically edge, portion, side. And we see here command, in other words, commandment. It goes on to say, all right, should say ing, sentence, talk, two-edged, all right? So the mouth, pi, means mouth, saying, sentence, speech, talk, two-edged, in other words, bringing judgment. So let's go to Hebrews chapter 4, verse 12. Let's do some precepts here. For the word of Elohim is quick and powerful and sharper than what? Any two-edged sword. We see pi here, piercing even to the dividing asunder of soul and spirit and the joints and marrow, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. All right, here's the pi right here, just so you can see the demonstration of it, right? It means mouth, instructions, command. It also means mind. right? When Paul says, let this mind be in you that is in Christ Jesus, what he's saying is, let the words that are coming out of your mouth fall right in alignment with the words that came out of the Hebrew Israelite Messiah's mouth. Numerical value is 80. And there you see is what? A set of lips. Dude, don't those lips look like our lips? Doesn't those lips right there that you see looks like the cartoons that are used to mock our people? See, even though you see those cartoons that are mocking our people, guess what? Indirectly, they're confirming what you see here, right? The pictograph, right, of Pa is what? The lips. And those are our lips right there. Brass. But let's deal with this real quick. Deuteronomy 8:3, it says this. And he humbled thee and suffered thee to hunger and fed thee with manna, which thou knewest not, neither did thy fathers know, that he might make thee know that man doeth not live by what? Bread alone, right? Bread only, but by what? Every word that proceedeth out of the mouth. Pa of Yahweh doeth man live. That's the very thing that the Most High Son, the Hebrew Israelite Messiah, echoed in Luke chapter 4 when he was going through his wilderness experience. Matthew chapter 4 as well, when he was going through what? His wilderness experience, right? So again, Phineas, a priest, took a stand against wickedness. One of the vulgar men of Israel brazenly brought a woman from Midian to the tabernacle directly before Moses and the congregation of Israel as they mourned over Yah's judgment. So while the people are in the tabernacle, right, when they are there coming together mourning the death of 24,000 men, right, this particular Israelite saw fit to get a Midianite woman, whether it's a Midianite woman or another Hebrew woman, Israelite woman. He took this woman and he began to do indulge in perversions, sexual activities in front of everyone. Right? Aren't we seeing these behaviors today? So, as they were mourning, so the man and the woman showed public sexual affections before the very eyes of Moses and the people while they were weeping in prayer. All right. The people were praying at the entrance to the tabernacle. So, this meant that the sexual affections and pleasures took place right there at the temple or the tabernacle. Out of zeal for Yah's holiness, Phineas himself slayed the blasphemous man and the pagan immoral woman. As a result, Yah's wrath was appeased and he stopped the plague. All right, wrapping this up. So the key quote, and his voice as the sound of many waters. Phineas, the Negro mouth of brass, represents the authority of the Hebrew Israelite Messiah, represents the authority of Christ, the Negro Messiah, as he rebuked, convict, and bring forth judgment. All right. And we could stop right there. We could stop right there. I mean, this is a little bonus information. I'll just show you some early depictions of the Hebrew Israelite Messiah, right? Let me just show you some coins here from the 7th century, right? Look to the left there, right? You see the coins right there? You see the hair. Look at the texture of how his hair is, right? You see how it's what? Wool. It looks like locks there. All right. But nevertheless, we're going to stop right here. I just want to show you that bonus material here. But nevertheless, did the Hebrew Israelite Messiah have green skin? No. So again, I want to say this to the church, to those that are in the Catholic Church, those that are in Christianity: stop worshiping Martians. Stop worshiping Martians. So we're going to stop right there. That's the end of the presentation. I hope this lesson blesses you. I hope you got a lot out of it. I hope this answered whatever questions that you may have in regards to um, how to properly describe who the Hebrew Israelite Messiah is, how to use the scriptures, how to use your references, because it's right there in front of you. And we use the description and the words that was used to describe Solomon to describe the Hebrew Israelite Messiah. And you see, you cannot get away from it. So I hope this blesses you guys. I'm looking at the comment section here. If you have any questions, feel free to post it there. And I'll go back over the video. And what I'm going to do, because this is a longer video than what I shared here. I'm going to do a actual a pre-recording of it, and I'll add some other stuff to there. So be on the lookout for it. I'll leave this up for you guys to go back and make references to, but I hope this give you a lot of meat and homework to do. Go back over and confirm everything that I just stated here. Don't just take my word for it. Go back and study it. Go back and research every reference that I gave here. That's why I stand boldly. That's why I have what that mouth of brass, like the Hebrew Israelite Messiah have, like Phineas have. I stand on boldness. Why? Because I know that what I'm stating is truth, and I know for sure, no matter what anyone may try to say, it will be hard for them to try to debunk what I just shared with you. If you just grab hold of what I just shared and you just go deeper in your studies, you will see that they will not have anything else that they could really say to what you say. If anything, they'll just end the conversation, go their way. So with that being said, I hope this really blesses you all. I don't see any questions. Let me just look here real quick. Appreciate Rabbi Stansbury for tuning in. Darren Tobias Harris. Let's see who else. Brother Keith Walker, appreciate you for the support. Rawls Tally, appreciate you as well. Kimo Ben Yisrael, appreciate you as well. I'm just looking at some of those that have tuned in. Rochelle, Yah's daughter, appreciate you for tuning in as well. So again, guys, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Let me see. I think I see comment here. Let's see here. The word of Yahweh, which came into Zephaniah, the son of Cushi, the son of, yeah, because Cushi is that shuts it as well. But when you understand Israel today, right? What's in Israel today, the Ashkenazis look at Cushi, or they'll say Cushi or Cushi. They will refer to that as being a curse word, like saying the N word here in America. They use Cushi like the N word over in Israel today. And I have videos that I can upload and show you that. So, but nevertheless, appreciate you again. King's Love, appreciate you as well. Thank you for tuning in. And again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to add it in the comment section, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and keep praying for me as I pray for you, family. And you guys have a blessed night. Shalom.